Hi everyone, I'm Leonard McAuliffe, Cybersecurity Partner in PwC. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webcast this morning. We'll be discussing PwC Digital Trust Insight Survey and the key themes with an expert panel that I'll introduce you to in a while. We're very proud to launch our Digital Trust Survey in the market again today. It's the longest serving annual survey on cybersecurity trends, going for its 26th year. And it covers up to 4,000 business and technology execs across 77 countries. So it's a very extensive survey, and we've great data and insights out of it that we'll be discussing this morning. Some of the hot topics coming out of the survey are the current top security threats, such as third-party risk has popped up again, ransomware in its different formats, and cloud security vulnerabilities and container misconfigurations, etc. They've all popped up again, and there'll be some more new vulnerabilities and threats with the impact of Gen AI. Also an increase in regulatory, so we'll be covering areas of this, talking about this also. You can't get away from this topic, but the impact of Gen AI for attackers and defenders, and how those will impact our businesses. We'll also be exploring the results of the survey from an Irish perspective. So when we talk about the 4,000 execs and technologists worldwide, we also have an Irish cut to this survey, and we'll be able to extract some of the key stats from that. Some of them here are that only 28% of Irish organisations have implemented robust across their organisations, which is really below their global peers. 74% of organisations will prioritise cyber risk mitigation in 2025. And I think that's been driven a lot by the EU regulations that were mentioned before. And then 66% of Irish organisations plan to boost their cyber security budget in 2025, which we're seeing ourselves across the market. I think it's another, not surprise, but it has come up again in the Irish cut of the survey, as we're seen as the top threat. And again this year, 48% of our Irish respondents see third-party breaches as the top threat. So that was another repeat of last year again. And I think that's got to do with the higher dependencies on third parties, regulations like DORA and NIS2 stating that you have to manage the risk around third parties, and some high-profile incidents as well involving third-party breaches that have affected our clients in Ireland. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce the panel. I'm delighted to be joined by an expert panel today who I know well, and they're very experienced in the area of cybersecurity and IT risk. Firstly, I'm going to introduce Gary Delaney, who's the International Chief Information Security Officer at BNY, or Bank of New York Mellon. Gary has held multiple security roles in FS across Ireland, the UK, and Australia, and he's recently joined BNY. And before that, Gary was the CISO for Bank of Ireland, where he was tasked with transforming the security capabilities of the bank. And he led an extensive security improvement program over a number of years there, which I've seen at my first hand to be very successful. He also has extensive experience at board level, focusing on areas like strategy, risk management, cyber operations, and then dealing with regulatory requirements as well. My next panelist, Jane Corr at CIE. Jane is a well-recognised and well-known information security and IT leader on the market here, and she's got a track record of building successful teams and security capabilities. I would definitely agree with this. She is known for her can-do attitude while always keeping the customer in mind. Jane has up to 30 years experience in IT and information security roles, so very experienced. Finally, we have Moira Cronin. Moira is a partner in our digital risk team, focusing on technology and cyber risk and resilience. Moira also has a wealth of experience focusing on financial services sector, manufacturing and technology areas. Moira specialises in IT risk management and controls and helping our clients navigate cyber and IT risk frameworks, with an emphasis, especially of late, on DORA and digital operation resilience. Moira tries to help clients to understand how to manage their digital risk effectively, interpreting these complex regulations at times and using a risk-based approach that aligns with the risk appetite. So I'm delighted with the three panelists and a nice mix as well from both the public sector and the private sector. So we'll get good views from either side. Just Jane, let's start with yourself. The cyber threat landscape is always evolving, and cyber incidents have become a focus of media, and there's high-profile organisations that have been targeted. Our survey highlighted that Irish respondents viewed third-party breaches, ransomware, and cloud-related breaches as the top three threats to their organisation over the next 12 months. What do you see as emerging threats they're finding concerning you and your organisation?
So now that I'm working in the public service, I actually worry about the threats related to the Internet of Things, and specifically around the convergence of IT and OT. So even if you take something like asset management, which is difficult enough to implement, if you throw OT into the mix, it's a bigger challenge. Another area that worries me, again, it's just the way the world is going. It's the complexity and the interconnectivity between organizations, third parties, cloud, OT, you name it. It's a big landscape to protect. And when you look at data is everywhere. So again, that's a challenge. And kind of surprised just with seeing the rise in deep fakes. And, it seems like we're up there, but actually, I've actually seen it a few times now over the last few years within organisations. So it's something that CISOs really need to be on top of.
Yeah, and this is really coming to the fore around deepfakes and instances of execs being impersonated. I think. Gary, Maury, and Jane, you'll remember the old way of doing this was a spoofed email from the CEO to the CFO saying, we're acquiring a business, it's all hush-hush, I'll tell you on Monday, transfer money into this account. And he sees it coming from the legitimate email of the CEO. Now, the deep fakes is much more advanced and sophisticated, where you can now copy and be on a call and look, and someone like, We've used the software here internally where we've tried it out ourselves, where I can talk like this, but the face that comes up and the actions could be Gary Delaney as the CISO for BNY. So it can impersonate someone. So it's very, very convincing if I'm on a video call now saying, not just an email, but a video call saying, you need to transfer funds into this account. So I think that is a rising threat, all right, 100%. Gary, the next question for yourself. 66% of Irish respondents plan to increase their cyber budget in 2025. Where do you feel that organisations should be investing in the coming months?
Yeah, Len, I mean, it's a very good question. And unfortunately, the answer is it depends. And that really, what I mean by that is it depends on the organisation, its level of maturity, the industry it's in. Because obviously regulated industries have probably invested over many years to a certain standard that gives them a certain level of capability, but it is commensurate with the risk and the threat associated with that industry, whereas SME type organizations may not have had that investment, and they may not have certain capabilities already. So what I would say is that structure it this way. All organizations need to invest in and continue to support hygiene factors. The fundamentals of security are what causes the problems. Vulnerability management, identity management, asset management, things like that are where the problems really, really start. We'll see most cyber events associated with the exploitation of a human in terms of social engineering activity, such as those you just described, which are getting more sophisticated. But they'll also exploit technical paths, such as a vulnerability sitting on a server or on a laptop, or the breach of an account or the escalation of privilege. So I think you need to ensure that the right level of investment and attention is paid to these hygiene factors. And that can be difficult for organizations. I would say there are many organizations that rely on third parties to do this for them, right? So they outsource the IT management, they outsource even security management. So they're wholly reliant on their ability, the ability of that partner organization to deliver those outcomes for them. And no matter how good that organization is, you will still never have the same level of visibility over what they're doing compared to what you can manage directly yourself. So if you are in that situation, I suggest that you need to pay attention to and ultimately invest in that oversight and control. And it very much aligns to that theme that Jane mentioned a moment ago with respect to third parties. Taking it forward beyond that, though, I mean, if you feel that those things are under control and you have a reasonable continuous investment in them, you need to think about things such as resilience, human-centric security issues, so training of the workforce, that is, as opposed to cybersecurity training, the continuous re-emphasis of the message around the role that each individual employee has in maintaining the security of the enterprise. You'll see it when you do training regimes or phishing tests or whatever. The vast majority of employees want to do the right thing and endeavor to do so. There is a level of error that employees naturally undertake, and that's because they're not properly educated on certain things. And then we do have that small percentage that are apathetic about it, and no matter what you try to do, will not comply. And you need to have methods to deal with that as well, because that represents the really soft underbelly of the security landscape for you. But finally, I would say, if you're running a security organization, or you're running an organization that needs to protect ICT, you need to invest in the talent. You need to bring your own people through, as well as hire from the market in a clever way. And there's a huge dearth of security professionals out there. Anywhere between 3 and 5 million jobs globally are regularly cited as being open. To what extent those jobs apply to individual enterprises, you need to break that down a bit. But you're going to have to develop talent as much as acquire talent in order to be able to solve this problem.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and that there is a kind of a war or a rush for talent across all organizations, not only to attract them, but also trying to retain them as well. Okay, thanks for that, Gary. Moira, a question for you on the regulatory side. There's an awful lot of talk, and in the survey as well as on the market at the moment, with the likes of DORA and this 2 EU AI Act. How do you foresee upcoming reg changes impacting cybersecurity strategy, and what steps should organizations take to ensure compliance?
Thanks, Len. I think there's a huge flurry of regulation coming out the market, and I suppose what's absolutely key here is to not actually focus on the regulation itself, but rather focus on the risk of your own organization. And what we really are encouraging our clients to do is to stand back from this regulation and say, how does this apply to me? How does this align with the risk appetite of my organization? And that's a really, really important step to take. And by doing that, Lynn, you're understanding your ecosystem, you're understanding the risks that your organization is facing, and essentially you are putting mechanisms in place to manage those. So you're not just complying with one regulation. And I think if you look at the financial services sector, if you look at the public sector, in many ways they're scarred from looking at regulation as pure compliance, as opposed to looking at actually what is this regulation trying to make me do, and really adopting that very, very, I suppose, pointed risk-based view of what is the best way to implement this in my organization. So in setting a cybersecurity strategy, that's what you need to do, because realistically, there's going to be more regulation. And what we've seen with a lot of the regulation that has come through, they all have a different lens. Like if you take the EU AI Act, focuses very much on the customer, right? If you look at operational resilience, again, very customer focused. Whereas I think DORA, NIS 2, they're probably a little bit more broad in their focus, but at the same time, every regulation has its scope. So in order to protect your organization, protect the value that you've built within it, you need to develop a framework that aligns with your risk appetite.
I 100% agree, Moira. And working with clients at the moment in the Irish market, and even globally, when we sit down and they're saying, I need a DORA strategy, or it's over dominating a cyber strategy or a resilience strategy, or NIS 2 dictating the whole strategy, we have to, call it and say, listen, your strategy is your strategy. It should be aligned with the IT and the business and your risk, and enabling the business as well to be successful. And that the frameworks that you build, no matter what regulatory requirements come along, whether it be cyber or IT risk, that your framework is strong and can map to any one of them. And I think that's a very important thing, that people don't, reshape their strategies or reshape based on new reg coming out. It should be new reg mapping to a framework. You may have to add on, for example, for the EU AI Act, add on new controls into your framework to deal with. That's fine, but I wouldn't be letting the reg dictate your strategy. I 100% agree there with you. Sticking on regulations, Gary and Jane, the regulatory landscape has increased. We've mentioned DORA, NIS 2, EU AI Act, and there's other stress testing for FS organizations and other regulations coming out as well. How do you feel organizations should be approaching compliance? And Gary, I'll start with you on this one. How do you think you should approach it?
Just have to take myself off mute there, apologies. Yeah, look, I mean, you've touched on this already, both yourself and Moira, with respect to the philosophical approach, and I do totally agree with both of you in terms of that. There are multiple regulations coming at us. DORA is obviously a big one that's looming large with an upcoming compliance date. When you look down through the things that are in DORA, especially say for someone like myself in FS, where we've been regulated and continuously driven to do certain things. Many of the things in there are not things that we weren't doing already, nor are they a surprise in terms of the regulator's requirement to do them. But I think with DORA, there is a level of being prescriptive about certain elements of it that you need to pay attention to the detail for, in order to ensure that you're doing it. But to be totally honest about it, all of these activities are very are actually critical to driving your security outcomes. So it's not just a scenario where it's compliance because it's a law or a rule. It's actually what you should be doing as well. The extent to which you do it and how you do it is part of that strategy that you mentioned. But as I say, it's a little bit prescriptive compared to some other regulations that we've seen in the past. But I do think that one area I would highlight, and again, it might be more relevant to the larger organizations than maybe to the smaller ones, but even for them, I would suggest that in the area of testing and the requirement to do continuous pen testing and to do threat-led testing, I wouldn't underestimate the preparatory work you need to do to put in a program that can continue to deliver that year on year. There is an enormous amount of oversight and control required, and there's a lot of rules around how those tests execute. Many organizations will have experience of this already with Tiber and CBEST and exams in pretty much every major regulatory environment. But I think this is casting the net a little bit wider, and you need to work with partner organizations to deliver outcomes there. So my suggestion would be that preparing for this, and the date's close, right? So one would assume that anyone who's going to be in the net is already working very diligently on it. But in preparing for this, I wouldn't just think about January as, okay, that's done, let's move on to the next thing. You're going to need to continue to manage this whole agenda going forward. It becomes part of your cybersecurity operational profile, and it becomes part of your risk management profile from this point forward. So it's a permanent thing, and you need to think about that.
100%. I think from and this is what's interesting, Gary, given this from the FS side, which is kind of dominated by DORA at the moment. Jane, on the public sector side, and when you're involved with critical infrastructure for the state, which NIS2 does apply to, what has been your organisation's approach to compliance, these new regs?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, again, when you work in a large organisation, you need to get on top of this because the questions. So we started with awareness at board level. So, what's DORA, what's NIS2, what does it mean to our regulations? And for the operators of essential services, probably the next step is a gap assessment. And I recommended an external gap assessment because, look, it's kind of coming in with the regulations that they'll have external oversight going forward. So really after that, develop your remediation plan. As Moira said, take a risk-based approach to that. There's a couple of things really here. So as head of security, I need to give the board confidence that my plan will keep them in compliance with the regulations. Now, there's a bit of a game changer in NIS2 in that the execs and board members can be held personally accountable. And I've actually seen a change in attitude based on that. So it puts a bit of pressure on CISOs to do their job. So you do need to be realistic here and, not gild the lily and say everything's fine. Be realistic and actually highlight your biggest risks. Come up with your program accordingly and deal with them, because the board will thank you for that, I think.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you bring up when you say board and senior leaders, will now be accountable. And I suppose it's quite difficult. And what we're seeing is the board saying, how do I know I'm being told the truth by my head of information security or my CISO? And can I see the metrics and board reporting actually giving me good data on how the security program is maturing, how you're mitigating risks? And I can see an awful lot of boards are becoming a lot more interested and a lot more educated in this area. So yeah, it is interesting from that NIS2 perspective around accountability. Moira, over to you for this question. It's around third-party risk. Third-party breaches were again the #1 threat in organisations, according to our Irish respondents, with 48% saying that this was their top threat. I know the increase in scrutiny from regulatory requirements for NIS and DORA has led to heightened concerns, but from your experience, what best practices do you recommend that clients follow to ensure that the supply chain is secure?
Yeah, Lynn, I think when you look at this, the third-party breaches, there's no surprise there, right? I mean, if you are a cyber criminal, then it's more bang for your buck, right? Because if you take down a third-party organization, you're going to take down a hell of a lot more, right? So that's why that obviously has come up again and again. And I suppose back to Gary's point of, it's the oversight that you have. It's very, very hard to build that in-house and actually manage a system that you have essentially outsourced. But that's what the regulator is actually expecting you to do, is to manage that system as if it was in-house. So there's no surprise that that's something that, is definitely very, very concerning, because there is a certain step away from control there, right? What I would say, in order to manage your supply chain, you have to understand it. And this is something we're seeing that is becoming a really big problem, because for the last 20 years, we have been essentially outsourcing. And we've been putting everything into this black box. And now you've got the likes of DORA and NIS2 coming along saying, you now need to unravel that black box and tell me what's inside in it, right? And actually understand your ecosystem end to end and really do that mapping. And until you actually are able to see that end-to-end mapping, then you can't actually understand the risks that your organization is facing, and therefore you can't manage them, right? So I think from that perspective, your first point here is to do that mapping, is to actually understand your data flow, not within your own legal entity, but actually outside into your third and even fourth and fifth, which is what DORA is actually pushing organizations to do, because we've all seen that the downstream impact of a third, fourth, fifth party can actually impact the service that your institution is providing. So starting with that ecosystem, I would also say that, look, a tech-enabled tool here probably a good idea. If you document a process end to end, once it's signed off in an organization, it's outdated, right? So you need something that's live and that's up to date and is actually giving you, real-time feeds that will give you the good data, Lynn, that you speak of going to the board, right? The second thing, and it comes back to a point that Gary made about the work that you need to do yourself in-house to actually understand your risk, right? There's no point in going to a third-party organization until you fully understand the risk of that system or service going down. And that comes back obviously to having the mapping, but really doing that risk assessment, I think, is what the step change is in all of these regulations. Because at the end of the day, when you think about it, like when you give a system or a service to an organization, you want it managed like it is in-house. And therefore you need to do that risk assessment up front to be very clear as to what level of testing you want, what contractual provisions you need to put in place, and what level of monitoring and right to audit, etc., that you need to have in front of you. The next piece then, Lynn, is your contractual provisions, which are obviously really, really important and very prescriptive when it comes to DORA, and causing a huge amount of anxiety in the market at the moment as people try to actually implement them. And this includes really specifying the level of testing that you want to have on that system to actually prepare for the fact that there may be an outage, and what does that mean for my organization. And then lastly, you need to deploy those strong TPRM controls. So it's all good things about the due diligence, making sure that you have, really strong exit plans in place, but also the monitoring and the data you're feeding back from that organization to your management team, but also to your board. And that data is extremely important because you need to keep on top of what they are doing and making sure that you are giving yourself the chance to have as much visibility as possible. So when you look at that and you look at the impact that a third party can have, this is a huge volume of work. And you wonder, as organizations look at this, are they going to stand back and say, if I outsourced 10 years ago for cost, for example, is that now being called into question? And really, what does my board think of this? Is this going to change my strategy? Is this going to change the strategic way that we invest in third parties? So there's a lot to play for yet in that space, I think, Glenn.
Yeah, and listen, it's no fluke or mistake that this is up again, second year running in the Irish context of the survey to be the top threat. And I suppose shameless plug here, no fluke or mistake that we started a third-party risk management managed services centre in Cork, because we just saw a huge demand and a real exhaust on the resources of the cybersecurity teams to have a whole team looking at hundreds or thousands of vendors and risk assessing those, collating all that data. So, thank God there's a good platform, SaaS solutions, tools to help enable this, and also some real-time monitoring of third parties to see if they've been breached, etc., and maybe that goes up in your risk profile. So it has matured. Still a way to go, because there's still the manual review of submissions from third parties, but I think AI can help us out there as well, and something that we're already working on to try and review to see if their policies, standards, etc., are in line with your own, and then use real-time monitoring as well of third parties to see if they've been breached or if their risk profile has changed. So yeah, it's a real hot area at the moment, and a big challenge to risk to solve as well. To the extent. Jane, onto yourself, kind of making it a bit more uplifting. What new technologies and innovations are you most excited about implementing to enhance, your cybersecurity posture?
I suppose identity and access management is one area I'm genuinely interested in. I'd love to see just things like biometrics, passwordless authentication, and even tools that make use of AI and machine learning to detect anomalies. Just as someone who just cannot remember all our passwords, that would really appeal to me. Zero trust is another area, right? So zero trust has great potential. And, the clue's in the name, zero trust, the confidence that you could have if that was implemented properly. So I think probably one area I'd actually like to focus on is just making zero trust more than just a tick box exercise. Oh, we've done zero trust, and make sure that it works. And probably finally, you said it earlier, I love a good spreadsheet and I love a good set of metrics. Now, it's just so foundational to your whole cyber program. I know there's no silver bullet out there, but God, I wish there was. So it's always hard work and it's always bespoke to an organisation, but worth it at the end of the day, I think. So they're the three areas.
Yeah, we spoke about this in our preparation. You know, the silver bullet of, and funny enough, it's a program that we worked on with Gary about how do you get that visibility from a cyber risk perspective, and mapping your cyber risks to your threat scenarios, and then mapping your threat scenarios to your control framework to say, well, are these controls actually mitigating these threat scenarios, and getting a visibility of that across an organization. Tricky, you know, but it can be done. But I haven't seen a silver bullet that pulls metrics from everywhere to feed into how effectively those controls are operating yet. And, you know, there's so many systems it's coming from, there's still a bit of manual work involved, all right. Gary, transformative technologies like Gen AI are playing a key role across organizations, including in cybersecurity. But the survey outlines that trust among internal stakeholders poses challenges. Can you share any insights you have on leveraging AI in security from both an offensive perspective or a defensive perspective?
Sure, Len. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think about AI, particularly doing an activity such as that which you've undertaken with the survey, is there's a problem with AI in that it's an all-encompassing term. I was reading an interesting book recently about AI, and it opens with the premise that imagine if there was only one collective noun for all types of transportation, and you had to talk about ships and cars and bicycles and scooters and everything with only the one word vehicle, and had to work through problems or opportunities or thoughts about that by only using that one collective noun. And that's actually where we are with AI. Everything is AI. I mean, marketeers are, dare I say it, exploiting it to a certain extent and stamping everything AI when you can clearly see that it's absolutely nothing to do with artificial intelligence. But that's one extreme and not necessarily a major problem as long as you understand that. But there is a difficulty with what we are terming AI, and I don't think there is clarity on what it is, and probably won't be clarity on what it is in terms of its categories of capability for a few years yet. But there is no question that there has been a major leap forward in technology and its ability to output certain things. So both generative and predictive AI concepts are demonstrating real world, I'm going to say impacts. Whether it's a benefit or not, that I think that remains to be seen. It's certainly, when ChatGPT came out, it was certainly quite compelling to see, you know, what it could do. But then when you turn your mind to, well, what's the practical application of some of these things, the universe gets a lot smaller very quickly, but that does not mean they aren't there. So in terms of that concept, what are we talking about? I mean, certainly, you know, and this is in the public domain. In Bank of New York, we use a virtual assistant called analyse, and it's actually an agglomeration of lots of the tools that you've seen come online, like ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on and so forth. But it allows us to create bespoke agents to do specific tasks and then use proprietary data in them to get outcomes. So that's practical. It is a time saver effort, and it certainly saves us a lot of time when we're doing things. It generates that base case for us to maybe do a proposal, work for a meeting, you know, that kind of thing. It is very much a productivity tool, and it works very well for that. So that's really good. But what's the application to security, you ask? Well, at this stage, I think what we're generally doing is looking at how these tools can further augment and support automation, but automation in a clever way. So you mentioned the work on risk measurement and so on and so forth. We look at all our threat scenarios on a continuous basis, and we have quite a library in terms of, you know, the threats that the institution is exposed to. we need to analyze those, we need to monitor them, and we need to respond to them. These types of tools and these types of capabilities allow us to do that at scale and at pace, and allow us to adapt them, and in fact self-adapt to changes in those threat scenarios. So the application of these tools to that area of particularly detective and responsive security is really compelling. I think we're all in a development phase for that. How will it really work? What are the good both proprietary options out there as people scramble to create products, as they always do in security when the next wave comes, and then working through that to find the ones that are actually going to be useful. So doing that sort of thing, is really important. And I guess as we predict, and I've no doubt this will happen, as offensive security activities ramp up around the use of these types of tools, and we touched on it a little bit today with the use of social engineering and deep fakes. I think Jay mentioned those. The use of all of these new ways to fool systems or to breach multiple layers of security control means we have to have defensive elements to face off against them. But I do think we're still in the early stages of thinking about how that will work as well. So it's quite iterative, because actually our collective understanding of what AI is somewhat hampered at this stage. But as you say, it will emerge. It will emerge in certain areas, and we'll start to see the light on this very, very soon, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks for your insights. Some good ones there. On the area, Moira, you've worked an awful lot over the last year on DORA, digital resilience and cyber resilience. Tell me, what are the trends that you're seeing and best practices that you're seeing from a digital resilience perspective?
Yeah, Lynn, I think, I suppose when the likes of DORA was first launched, I mean, when you see how companies have actually evolved with it across the 2-year implementation period, it's actually, it's great in a way to watch companies really, focus in on not the regulation itself, but actually what it can do for their organization. So what I'm actually seeing now is that organizations are, not treating this as compliance, right? They are treating this as something that they, to Gary's point, they will need to live with for going forward. So this isn't just a tick box, one and done. This is here to stay. And I think, look, for a lot of organizations, they're finding that, they need to get more talent in to support this. And they also need to, increase their headcount to be able to cope with particularly that third party space where they're saying, well, do we do this in-house? Do we do this, do we outsource it? And therefore, what level of monitoring controls and who's going to do that in-house? So I can see definitely, a lot of that. I think having that right foundation that we spoke about at the start, having those, those cyber frameworks really embedded in your organization is really important. What I do also see, others doing is having that, not a siloed approach. This DORA and NIS2 and all these resilience in general needs a cross-functional approach. This isn't just an IT issue. This isn't just a compliance issue. This is everyone actually pulling together. And if you look at what we're facing from a cyber perspective, not to mind an operational perspective, but just from a cyber perspective and the threat actors that are out there, we need to come together. And not only in one institution, but actually across all the institutions across Europe and globally to actually fight against this and actively protect, our products, but also protect our consumers. So, there's a lot of, I suppose, looking at this regulation and looking at resilience as, more of a transformative approach to business more than anything else. And the last thing, and I think we've touched on this a number of times, is actually bringing the board along. And Jane, you alluded to the fact that they have far more interest when, they're accountable and they're now, have this responsibility. But I think that's huge. We are moving through a digital era. Anyone that's sitting on a board at this point needs to understand the basics. But I also think that at a board level, they need someone that's going to be able to challenge management. So when they bring in the data, Lynn, that you spoke of earlier, who's challenging that they've actually taken the right approach? And I think having those people at board level. So there's some of the things that we're seeing, Lynn, the best kids in the class do from a resilience perspective.
Excellent. Okay, listen, we're going to move to some questions from the audience now. Let me just see what's coming in here. With the right to audit is now an increasingly standard expectation in contracts. The challenge now appears to be how to use the evidence for this, and what are the panel's thoughts. So the question is really on the right to audit. And Jane, you're nodding there, so I'm going to hand that one to you if you don't mind.
It's actually, you know what I think about this? So you can deal with plenty of third parties, and the level of information you get back from them will be vast, right? So you really need to prepare your organization for making decisions. So does the organization realize that when the security department does an audit on a third party and they say, no, I don't recommend you go forward with that third party, that's understood, and that there is a mechanism for a decision to be made or a risk to be accepted. So I think that can help a lot, rather than, and it doesn't have to be security says no, it's here's security's opinion on this. Yeah. So,
and I think, Jane, it is important for CISOs, and experienced and strong ones do tend to say, listen, we're not willing to accept this risk into our organization. And there's always going to be a kickback from the business, but sometimes you just got to put your foot down or say, here's the controls you could implement, that they could implement, so that they can be onboarded. So I think that is an important point. I think another question here, Gary, around the skills gaps and what strategies are organizations employing to attract and retain top cybersecurity talent. And I know we touched upon it earlier, but maybe something on that.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's a global marketplace for security talent, and Ireland's a very good example of that. You know, in the major centres around the country, we've people who have made Ireland their home and come from lots of different countries to work in, you know, our primary industries, and, you know, technology is one of those, right? So you do need to be able to think as broadly as possible about where you might acquire the talent, and to create the opportunities for people to come and work here. And there are problems with people coming here. Obviously, housing is a major issue, and we all know that. However, once you have the talent as well, you need to nurture it. And I think people in security careers, you know, it's certainly a good industry to be in, right? I don't think any of us will deny that. There's plenty of opportunity globally. So that talent has options. And if you don't nurture that talent and support that talent, most people will go and find that option elsewhere, and that's really, really important. You need to consider that acquiring an individual and their skills is only the first step. So how do you do that? Well, you know, it's probably back in a way to traditional HR type concepts of creating the right objectives and the right development path for individuals to the goals that they wish to achieve. But I think I see this a lot in technology, and I certainly have over my career, where there's an assumption of one size fits all. So seniority is always about getting to a manager level or an executive level and that kind of thing. That's not what everybody wants to do, nor should we reasonably expect everybody to want to do it. Some people love their role in terms of security because of the technical challenges and working through technology and technical issues. And the best technologies isn't always the best manager. So we need to really work out what people want and then help them to achieve that, and to value their contribution in all forms, and to ensure that we give them the right education and training to support that going forward. Otherwise, as I say, they will leave. And it's that perennial conversation you have. I mean, I've certainly had it over the years, many, many times in each financial year, where we have a person who represents significant talent, has got a new opportunity, and they're telling us they're going to leave. And then we scramble to try and keep them. Whereas actually, if we'd concentrated on keeping them in the first place, we probably would spend far less money, far less time, and had far less disruption if we'd managed to keep them on the right career path. And just to finalize that, you do need to see that, you know, we all live in a very mobile workforce now. Long gone are the days where you leave school or college, join the bank, stay there 40 years, retire, right? That's not how we work anymore. And I think that's a good thing. Anyone who wants to do that, absolutely fantastic if that's what you want to do, but most people are not doing things that way. So you may have to recognize that a talent will be with you for a certain period of time, and then he or she will move on to the next thing with another organization for a new challenge. And you have to be prepared to think about the life cycle in that way as well. So I do think it's about paying attention. It's about providing training and opportunity, growth and development. But I'd say the most important thing is, and probably most of us let ourselves down a little bit on this, is really understanding that person's motivations and career path objectives. We have those chats once a year or twice a year, but do you really understand where the person's coming from? You should ask yourself that question.
Constant coaching, I get it. Okay, listen, guys, I think the questions are still piling in here. I think we could stay here all day. I know I could, discussing cybersecurity topics, but I want to respect people's time, so I'm going to wrap things up here. I have to say a huge thank you to Jane Corr from CIE, Gary Delaney from BNY, and our own Moira Cronin as well. I think the discussions have been very interesting. The guys have great experience here, and I hope that you've all learned something or found it interesting as well. If you want any more information of any of the topics covered or other areas of cybersecurity and privacy, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the team here, and we'd be happy to help. Thanks again for your time this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.